Now let's see if everything is working fine. And yeah. Now let's see if everything is working fine. Okay. Seems like it's working. And yeah. Alright then. Well, now let's see if everything is working fine. Welcome, one and all who may or may not be here. Okay. Seems like it's working. And yeah. So yeah, let me just quickly close some windows. Alright then. Well, now let's see if everything is working fine. Welcome, one and all who may or may not be here. Okay. Seems like it's working. And nice. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let me just quickly close some windows. Alright then. Alright then. Well, now let's see if everything is working fine. Welcome, one and all who may or may not be here. Okay. Seems like it's working. And nice. Okay, so we are going to, as I say, cover some politics. Hello. Okay. So politics, right? That's a thing that exists, and we are going to cover some South African stuff. The first few things I want to cover is the Economic Freedom Fighters became South Africa's third largest political party in just 10 years. What's behind its electoral success? Just go through it to give some thoughts on it and what does this really mean for South Africa in general. And then we're going to go through Cape Independence and if that is realistic. So yeah, a lot of things, or two things to cover. So let's get on with it. Economic Freedom Fighters became South Africa's third largest political party in just 10 years. What's behind its electoral success? South Africa is drawing nearer to a landmark national general election in 2024. Based on the recent electoral trends and opinion polls, the governing African National Congress (ANC) is expected to drop below 50% of the national vote for the first time since democracy in 1994, which is a very big thing. Okay, oftentimes with countries who were under like any colonialism or whatnot, the political party, or the sort of people behind that political party normally get very favorable trends, and there's a reason for that. Obviously, you know, you have these people who took your country out of the state of what it was in, which was a very poor country or a very unstable country, and then obviously they made it stable, and that's something that's really you can just ride that wave. You don't really have to do much other than just be good, right? But obviously it seems like the African National Congress, the ANC, has some dipping down, has been dipping down, and you know, let's see why. The end of a single party dominance is expected to result in the country having its first national coalition government since the ANC came to power. The Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF, country's third largest party, is a must-watch in that transformation. The party's electoral support has been growing since 2014 amid the declines for both ANC and the Democratic Alliance (DA), the main opposition. In the time period, the ANC's electoral support has fallen from over 62% in 2014 to 57.50% in 2019, and the DA's from 22% to 20%. The A share, vote rose from just over 6% in its first election in 2014 to about 11% in 2019. The EFF also gained more seats in political legislations. So obviously, this is something that is very interesting to see how a party with this much went to this much, and then the DA went down 2%, which is again something that's really impactful because this doesn't really happen on a whim. Parties, especially with South Africa having a first past the post system, is a sort of thing that can't just happen overnight, because obviously these first past the vote systems incentivizes just two political parties that are dominant and not really anything else. So when you have this sort of dominance and then the dominance sort of wanes and another party gets traction, something's really changing in the country to spark this sort of change. We are political scientists with experience in leftist parties, Latin America and South Africa. We did a critical analysis of the EFF through the lens of the party's communication strategies. We analyzed the survey and exit polling data as well as the ideology, strategy, and tactics of the EFF from political communication theory perspective. Political communication focuses on the political actors crafted and distributed their messages. Based on the findings, we argue that the EFF has gained its modest but significant status in South African politics by stealing the ANC's mantle. It portrays itself as a true custodian of the values the ANC imposed during the anti-apartheid struggle, as stated in the Freedom Charter. Its blueprint and for a free South Africa, the EFF accuses the ANC of having abandoned this agenda. This has enabled black South African voters to shift their support from the ANC to the EFF without changing their political orientation. This lies behind the EFF's decision to focus its messaging around lands and jobs that resonate given the country's history of black land disposition and stubbornly high unemployment, especially with young people. And that's the success to the EFF's recent rise, is because they're actually hitting home onto what a lot of South Africans are feeling. They're feeling very economically deprived. They're feeling like there's not really a future for them, and that all their sort of chances that they could have gotten were stolen from them. Trying to focus on that point for a lot of South Africans is what made a lot of them shift over to the EFF, because if you just hear without any context a statement from the EFF and the ANC during the apartheid era, there's no real difference between the two. And that's the thing that a lot of people who are shifting over to the EFF really want. They want this economic freedom and this ability to just, exist without struggling. And the EFF hits home on that point. But obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean it's all good. But we'll get to that when we get to that. Electoral performance. The EFF was founded as a political party in July 2013 following the expulsion of its leader Julius Malema from the ANC in 2012. Malema has been a president of the ANC Youth League before being expelled for misconduct. The EFF went on to garner 1.2 million voters in 2014 and 25 seats in parliament. Come the 2019 national election, it won 44 seats in a parliament and just under 1.9 million votes. The strength of the EFF is the greatest in the Northwest province, which has garnered 17.9% of the vote in the 2019 national general elections. This is followed by Gauteng 13.53 and Limpopo provinces 13.14. Now, one of the things that is very interesting about this is the Northwest province is not a economically deprived province, but it's definitely not richer than, for example, Gauteng. Gauteng is a lot more of a richer area, and so obviously a lot of the rhetoric that is used by the EFF doesn't really hit as hard as in much more poorer areas. And again, that's simply because the EFF is targeting that sort of feeling that a lot of South Africans have, which is a lack of economic equality, and that resonates with a lot of people. In the official opposition in Northwest Limpopo and Mpumalanga, where it got 11.51%, it continues to battle in the Western Cape 4.1% and Eastern Cape 7.72%. Its shares of the vote in KwaZulu-Natal has increased from 1.97% in 2014 to 99.96% in 2014, which again, obviously you can definitely see this trend of the EFF rising a lot more, especially in areas that aren't necessarily poor, economically deprived. And again, that's because as we've gone on since 2014, the country has gone a lot more downhill for its economic reasons. And that, again, a lot of people like the rhetoric of EFF, it just hits home of what they want as people. In the 2021 local elections, the party received 10.31%, mainly replicating its 2019 national results. Now again, this is really, and then we get to the electrical strategy and tactics. Analysts sought to understand what drives the EFFs to growth, for this growth. From their 2013 founding manifesto, it says, draws inspiration from the broad Marxist-Leninist tradition and Freudian schools of thought in their analysis of the state, imperialism, culture, and class contradictions in every society. It positions itself as anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist, and opposes what it calls as neoliberal agenda of the ANC. The EFF declares that it is a radical militant economic emancipation movement rooted in the popular grassroots formations and struggles. Those included worker movements, NGOs, community-based organizations, and lobby groups. Now, this is very important. Again, anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. Now, again, this is their founding statement, but this, obviously, with their rhetoric, they don't really say we're anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist all the time. Again, they hit home on the grievances, as it says here, in a bit of the position itself as a viable radical alternative to the ANC. The EFF use grievances, exploitation, radical posturing, agenda-setting, framing and strategic arsenal, inequality, radicalized land ownership patterns, persistent racism, unemployment, and other issues, the main grievances the party has exploited. And again, that's like an important thing. It's trying to hit home on a lot of what people's feelings on the current modern day is what makes them a lot more popular than what they used to be. And again, that's like just really important, you know? And yeah, it is done through the political communication and theatrics in Parliament, including wearing the uniforms of workers, disrupting proceedings and chanting slogans, as well as its issues it has chosen to fight for: the streets, social media, the courts, and party events, which again attributes to the rise in popularity. Seeing a political party actually on the ground, going with and fighting and talking with other people, that's a lot more humanizing. And again, this sort of populist agenda, this populist language, rhetoric, and actions is what makes them a lot more popular with people, because you can actually see them with you, especially their clothings, right? A lot of the clothing that many EFF members wear, like, what is this? It's just a t-shirt and like a hat. Like, that's just like what normal people wear, and it makes them a lot more approachable than what the DA or ANC have, which is very buttoned up, suit and tie, and very we're sort of better than you mentality. Even if that's not the intention, it does come across like that to many people. It had its skirmishes with alleged racist companies, white farmers and schools, and many other opponents that helped drive its narrative. The EFF's success in the Northwest, Mpumalanga and Limpopo, appears to have a lot to do with the party's rhetoric on the mining sector, which is prominent in these provinces. The party's strategic political communications portrays it as fighting for oppressed mine workers or host communities in those areas. It overtook in Marcana, the site of 2012 massacre of striking mine workers by police, assisted to this. Additionally, Limpopo is home to the home base of the founders of the party, Julius Malema and his deputy Floyd Shivamba. Founder constituencies tend to contribute significantly to the party's success in South Africa. For instance, the Inkatha Freedom Party and the National Freedom Party are strong in KwaZulu-Natal, where they were formed and their leaders originated. And again, like, this is describing quite well on why the EFF sort of has a rise in it, because again, they're on the ground and their language that they use really does resonate with a lot of people. And yeah, we don't really have to go over the last bit and just again end off on this, and that the EFF uses a lot of this rhetoric to bolster themselves and to make them a lot more approachable. And again, it makes sense why they would do that. Now, does that mean they're a good party? Because obviously you can act kind, you can look kind, you can be with them, but that doesn't mean your policies are actually good. A lot of the EFF itself is, how would you describe, not particularly good on many issues. If you look at the article itself, it talks about, if I can find it, yeah, right here. Like, it has skirmishes with allegedly racist companies, white farmers, and schools. Like, a lot of the combatants that a lot of the sort of fights that they have are with people that are sort of seen as these things, allegedly racist companies, white farmers, and these schools who have what issues, who knows. And if you look on their Wikipedia page, you can see a lot of the controversies and issues that they have with themselves is not only huge, but very in-depth with a lot of it. So again, there's a lot of here, but we can go to quickly the like racial and ethnic prejudices. So again, anti-white racism. Since its establishment, the EFF has made a numerous of controversial racial and ethically based statements about a number of South African minority groups, particularly white South Africans. And again, this is sort of like white South Africans, especially after apartheid, were still well off enough, and nowadays you can't necessarily think that. There's a few issues here, but again, as we read on, the EFF has also been criticized for adopting a biological interpretation of race that allows the party to easily generalize and attribute racism to particular groups of individuals based on their demographic classifications. And again, this is such a weird statement, right? It says, the EFF has been criticized for adopting a biological interpretation of race, which is a weird thing to think of, because, like, isn't that what, Nelson Mandela tried to go against? Like, the white South Africans of the National Party saying, hey, blacks are, like, biologically bad. Like, isn't that an issue? Yet the EFF has adopted that same interpretation. I don't think the issue with the National Party was that they were wrong on which race was inferior. The issue with them was that they were wrong that there were any races that were inferior. And as you read on for this entire thing, you can see there's a lot of issues. And it's not just like anti-white racism. It's also, as here, anti-Indian racism and anti-black racism, which is mostly confined to sort of xenophobic tendencies and also disliking certain people. And just calling them, bad blacks or something like that. And again, like, the EFF may have rhetoric that is very poignant and talks to real issues that many South Africans are actually facing, but their policies, their actions, and what they want to do with that sort of thing doesn't really mean anything good for, South Africans at all, blacks or whites. Because again, the way forward for South Africa is not we reverse the roles and now, whites should be the oppressed ones and blacks should be the ones at the top. No. The way to fix it is to just make no one unequal and to give everyone the opportunity to, determine their lives work. A lot of the things that the EFF wants, like healthcare for everyone and wanting economic, opportunity, are good things to have. Everyone should have those things. But that doesn't necessarily mean what they want is actually good, because what they want is economic opportunity and equality for just one group, not for everyone. And again, that's the issue. So yeah. Wild, am I right? So now, let's go over Cape Independence. Okay. The party.
As South Africa becomes more politically unstable, the idea of Cape independence is growing in popularity. But how realistic is this objective? I posed this question to Phil Craig. He is with the Cape Independence Advocacy.
Now, just to quickly summarize, that this is a video that is about, again, is Cape Independence realistic? And Cape Independence, for anyone who doesn't really know, is about the part of South Africa. Let me look up South African map. It's basically this part of Cape Town, like this part and some other parts, and basically calling for independence. There's a lot of reasons why they wanted to do that, but again, obviously, we're going to go through here and, determine if it is realistic.
that 58% of the people of the Western Cape would now like to see a referendum on Cape independence. So that's a very, very significant number.
As South Africa becomes more politically unstable, the idea of Cape independence is growing in popularity. But how realistic is this objective? I posed this question to Phil Craig. He is with the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, and he and I spoke in a longer conversation on my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara. What follows is a short extract from that conversation. Enjoy. Could you tell us more about your personal background and also the Cape Independence Advocacy Group? How did it come about, and what are some of its objectives?
Look, I got involved as an individual person who could see that the future for South Africa was not as rosy as it should be.
Just to speed this up just a slight bit.
We could see the storm clouds on the horizon, and we wanted to find solutions. I'd always felt that Cape independence was probably going to be a natural counterpoint to increasing African nationalism in the rest of the country. Although, fun enough, it became apparent that wasn't really going to happen naturally, and we were always waiting for somebody else to stand up. I then got involved myself at the beginning of 2020, after having had discussions with several of the independence groups, with some like-minded people, we decided that nobody exactly represented what it was that we wanted to do, and we got together and we formed the CIAG in April 2020. So that's when we launched the CIAG. What's our mission?
Now, just to read this quick, a bit quick. The ANC government is leading us into an economic and social disaster. The Western Cape has constantly rejected their agenda, yet our democratic voice is rendered redundant by a system where our government is not chosen by us, but despite us. Our best hope is creating our own first world nation on African southern tip, the Cape of Good Hope. Together, let's build the South Africa's newest country. Now, there are a few things that are a bit of an issue here. One, I don't disagree that the ANC is definitely not a party that's been good for South Africa, at least in the last while, because they have done a lot of things that has driven us down to an economic and social disaster, from sort of unable to address the needs of everyday South Africans to finding jobs and to keeping jobs, and to additionally having access to basic services, failing infrastructure. The whole load shedding thing is its own other issue. There's a lot of things the ANC has done very poorly, but one of the things that I do take a bit of issue is the democratic voice part, and that is again hard to say. The ANC is winning not necessarily because again they're right, but simply because there aren't any good ways or any good parties that are trying to, speak the same way, speak in a very populist language, to say to the average South African that, hey, you've had a terrible life and things aren't getting better, but we can make it better. We want to address, inequality, loss of employment. We want to do these things and strive to fix those issues. That's why the EFF has been gaining a lot of prominence, is because the EFF actually, addresses these issues. They may not actually do it in any meaningful manner, policy-wise, but they feel like it, they sound like that. And to the average South African who doesn't really know too much about politics, that's good enough for them. That's all right by them. And they want to, feel like they're being heard. And that's, I think, a lot of people are sort of missing the point, is that no political party except for the EFF is really hitting home on these fronts. Now, there will be obviously politicians and from the ANC, DA and other political parties saying that, hey, we, have a terrible crisis, but, we're going to fix it. But it is not in this sort of rhetoric that a lot of people want to hear. They want to hear something that's like the EFF's rhetoric, that we're passionate, we're here for you, we want to help you, and we want to stop the terrible, terrible decline of this country, our great country, our amazing country. And that, again, is what a lot of people resonate with. And that's what it's a bit of an issue with me, is saying, like, yeah, sure, your voice may not be really heard and whatnot, but, like, that's just simply because, these people in these parties aren't really trying to give you that, say that they hear you. All they want to do is just to go as things have been going on for quite a while. And since that's what it's been for a majority of South African, political parties have been doing, it feels like there's no real voice to that. But again, and when, a lot of other parts of South Africa aren't really heard, that's just what it was.
I think probably we were. Look, my background is in marketing, sales and marketing, and therefore my approach to Cape Independence was very much a marketing approach. And my initial starting point is, well, look, what do we need to do to deliver Cape Independence? I felt a lot of the other groups perhaps hadn't really got that covered, and we set about saying, well, look, how do we create the conditions that are likely to bring Cape Independence about? And our sort of two primary aims really were to get Cape Independence established in the media, so that people were talking about Cape Independence and it developed as an option, and then to influence the sort of positions of political parties and political actors towards Cape Independence. They were our two primary aims, and look, obviously we part of that was supporting the other existing groups who were pushing for Cape Independence. So,
and that is very important. This guy does definitely know how to play to crowd and whatnot, and again, having the ability to have that background of marketing and whatnot and sales allows you to have insight that again not a lot of people have. Again, a lot of South Africans want to vote and be energized and to have something move and some momentum forward, but a lot of them won't really get that because a lot of the politicians nowadays don't really speak to that feeling that we all have, which is like we're scared about what's going to happen economically, socially to our lives. We want change and whatnot, but a lot of politicians don't really act on that. And that's why I think Cape Independence has been growing quite a bit, because the Cape Independence groups are actually hitting home on a lot of issues that South Africans feel that mainline politicians should be doing. Now, obviously, politicians shouldn't just be like speaking in a very this very populist way. They should be trying to actually pull through with those populist language, but obviously again starting with that gives a lot more South Africans energized, and that's one of the things I think that Cape's independence is really better than a lot of other areas of South Africa, is that they're very energized and willing to do something.
That really is our role, to promote Cape Independence as a discussion point, to influence political parties and actors, and then to support other people as best we can in their work towards Cape Independence.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from
Underlying principle here. Why are you trying to achieve Cape Independence?
So I think because we've got problems that aren't going to be fixed. I had the privilege of speaking at the press club earlier in the year, and the topic was what's driving support for Cape Independence, and we summed it up with one sentence. That we've got a problem that Cape Independence can fix when nothing else will, and I think that kind of sums it up as in a one-liner.
Now, I'm not sure if Cape Independence will fix the issues that are plaguing South Africa, or at least the specific parts of the Cape. I don't really think that's the solution, but he is right when he says that, hey, we feel like there's an issue and it's not being solved. We want to solve that issue. And that's, legitimate in how they're feeling. May not be legitimate in actually going to solve the issue, but
What is the issue? Well, the people of the Western Cape have, for 30 years, the majority of voters in the Western Cape have never had the government they voted for, and they have no reasonable prospect of ever getting the government.
Now that's a bit of a weird thing. Never had the government they voted for. So, that's how democracy works. Like, if there's a government and you don't like the government that's in charge, that was voted democratically, that's just democracy. Like, I may not be happy with the ANC being in charge, but like, people voted for the ANC and they got the ANC. If I wanted the ANC out, what the solution is get people to be convinced of my politics, which is don't vote for the ANC, vote for another political party that's a lot more legitimate, and try to drum up support for them. Like, that's how politics works. That's how democracy works. You may not like the outcome, but again, you just have to fight for that outcome to become a reality. You can't just like, well, I voted for me voting for I don't know, the what party? I don't know. IF, I guess. I vote for the IF, right? And wow, they're not in charge of parliament. Damn, I'm mad. I'm really mad. Like, of course they're not in charge of parliament, because you're not advocating for your group in a very aggressive manner. Like, if they took the energy and the style and the rhetoric and all of that from the Cape Independence group and just applied that to I don't know, the DA or some other alternative to the ANC, they would literally have a lot more support, because South Africans want to, do something. But it feels like so many of the rhetoric that, the ANC and DA just give us just there are issues in this country. We'll solve them. And that's it. Okay, yeah, sure. You're not really describing what the issues are, what we're feeling in any meaningful manner, in any manner, in any way that ignites people. You know, people want to do something. You just have to give them the opportunity and outlet to do it.
They vote for. So in terms of just democracy for the people of the Western Cape, there's a problem, and you have to have a chance of electing the government you want, and if you can't for decades upon end, then clearly there is an issue, and it's not a benign issue given how poor the performance of the government that has been elected by the other provinces. So I think that's really sort of start off with democracy, and I think we tag on to that then the ideology, and I think the Western.
Now. There's only one legitimate reason why he may be saying like, oh, we feel like our votes don't really matter, and that is somehow the ANC has been like thrown out ballots or votes for other political parties and basically been just like chucking them out. You know, that's the only way I will accept that. Like, okay, cool, that's much more of a legitimate reason to want independence, is that like you feel like your votes are literally being thrown away by the ruling party. That's a lot more legitimate. But I don't think that's happening. I think what's happening is just like people are upset that their party that they're voting for isn't in charge, even though they need to, you know, sort of make sure everyone knows that and does that, you know? Like, the only way the DA or any other political party alternative to the ANC is going to win is by, you know, getting out there and trying to convince people to vote that way. Like, that's the only way to do it, you know? Like...
Cape, as can be demonstrated from its voting record, clearly has different views to the rest of South Africa, and we know we see one set of solutions. South Africa sees a different set of solutions. I'm not sure South Africa actually sees any solutions, but it thinks it sees a different set of solutions. Therefore, if you respect democracy, you have to respect the right of the rest of the people in South Africa to elect the government they want. But we don't really feel any urge to go down with the ship. And given that we're not voting for that, and we never really have voted for that, that's Cape independence in a nutshell. We'd love to save South Africa. We can't. It's not up to us.
Well, I mean, technically, you can, right? You just have to energize people into voting a very specific way. Like, that's literally the only way to do it. The other alternative way is, I guess, getting a different kind of voting system, right? Like, ranked choice voting, right? Where you rank the political parties you have, where you have, like, I don't know, DA first, and then second is, like, your first choice is, like, I don't know, what party? There's like 16 of them. I don't know. You can say like your first party is I don't know, the IF again. IF's not really great. I don't really like them, but just for the sake of the example, IF, and then you have the DA, and then it's like, okay, cool. So now that you have the IF on top, the IF didn't get the amount of votes that they got to win that seat, election, or whatever, and then it goes to the DA, your second choice. Like, that could work as well. There are other alternative methods that can work. But again, now that we're in a first past the votes, which is just you vote for one party and that's all you get, like, yeah, the only way you can change what's happening is by just making people vote the way that you want them to vote, by convincing them, by arguing with them, and that's literally the only way that's going to have any change. You have to, be the change you want to see. You have to convince people. And again, that's definitely a hard thing to do, but like that's the only way to do it. Trying to say like, hey, we're going to be independent so we can get, the people that we want in office, it's not really work. Because what is going to happen is like, what if there's still issues with the Cape and voting and political parties not being the ones that people vote for? What then? And even another small chunk of the Cape being independent again? That's not going to be a viable option.
But actually, we want to be sure as hell want to make sure we save the Western Cape where we live and where we are the voters.
Okay, so you're focusing local and trying to distance yourself from some of the more harmful policies emanating out of Pretoria. But now, Phil, what do people of the Cape think about this idea of Cape independence? Is there support for what you're doing?
Well, they're warming rapidly to the idea. So I think, first of all, we've just polled. This is our second poll, and that the results are very, very encouraging for us. And I think probably the two most telling statistics are that 58% of the people of the Western Cape would now like to see a referendum on Cape independence. So that's a very, very significant number. And I think that has to be taken into context with 58% want a referendum. And the DA have already announced that they're going to fix the referendum legislation. Those two things clearly aren't unrelated. The DA have come to the referendum question as a result of political pressure within the province because people are wanting change, and Cape independence is... Now
that's a bit of a different thing. People wanting a referendum doesn't necessarily mean that referendum is going to be a good idea. We can take a look at Brexit, and for Britain, Brexit was basically the United Kingdom leaving the EU, right? They were no longer part of the European Union, and they split. Now, Brexit was like not really a good idea for multiple reasons, because it severely crippled the United Kingdom in many different ways, from having easy trade relations with other European countries to additionally to other things such as having a wide funding from the European Union as well. While they may have given a lot of money, they also got a lot of benefits from that, both economic and also just some straight up funding. And for Cape Independence, like, a lot of people may want that, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea. Like, me wanting to like eat 5 buckets of ice cream is something I want, but that doesn't necessarily make it a good idea.
Is gaining momentum. So we've got 58% wanting a referendum on Cape independence, and at last check we've got 46.2% of registered voters.
There's one thing that I want to see from this is the economic part, the economic aspect. How will the Cape survive from being separate from South Africa economically? Additionally, when we look at the UK and how that is, they had to redo a lot of their trade treaties simply for the fact that because they had to make new ones, and that means that they're now in a different position of power. With the European Union as a bloc, as an economic unit, has a lot more power and sway in what they can ask for other countries to give them, at what price and what time, and everything basically. But now, as a single country, they have a lot more of a weaker standing. That doesn't mean the UK is a weak country. That just means that the UK's standing was here, like all the way on top, off the camera, all the way to the bottom now. Still big, still larger than most countries. That doesn't mean that it's a strong standing.
Western Cape supporting the idea of Cape independence, and not only have we got a majority wanting a referendum, but I mean we are very, very close now to getting a majority of people to support Cape independence. So I think there's a lot of support. And what's been very, very encouraging in this second poll from our first poll is we've seen a significant growth. Amongst registered voters, that increased from 34% to 46% in a 12-month period, and all of that growth has come amongst coloured and black voters, which is really positive, because we understand that, given South Africa's history, that there is more hesitancy, or there was more hesitancy amongst the groups that were sort of previously discriminated against. So from our point of view, that has been really, really encouraging, and across the racial groups.
Which again, like, sure, there's a lot of people who may want it, but is it a good idea actually, right? Like, what will be the economic consequences of separating from South Africa as a whole and having to now, start your whole new trade treaties and relations with countries again? Like, the Cape would be a lot in a weaker position if they just split from South Africa, because now they have to do it from now they have to make trade relations in a much weaker state. Like, what's stopping from a lot of countries demanding the Cape to do a lot of things that they wouldn't have done otherwise if they were still part of South Africa?
65% of white voters want Cape independence, 50% of coloured voters now want Cape independence, and 22% of black voters want Cape independence.
Okay, so in terms of the methodology for this polling, because I'm sure many of viewers will be asking about that, the sample size was about 886, is that correct? And the margin of error, was that about 4%, you said?
Correct, yeah, it was 886 sample size and a 4% margin for error. The poll was conducted by Victory Research.
Okay, yeah, and they're a well-known polling company in South Africa. All right, Phil, so the DA has tabled this private members bill to amend the Referendums Act, and we had an episode with Richard Wilkinson on federalism, which we'll link to here, that discussed this process in more detail, so if anyone's interested, they can go and watch that. But essentially, would you see this Cape independence question being included on a referendum? Is that your ultimate objective? And how would this process play out?
Yeah, look, it definitely is our objective, and actually our expectation, if I'm honest. I think how this is going to play out, first of all, we've got the passage of bill through Parliament, and I think there are a lot of moving parts, so clearly there's a degree of speculation on my part. But first of all, I expect...
Again, like, they aren't hitting home on the thing that I think is actually a lot more important to ask, which is, will the Cape, if it does get independence, actually survive? Will it actually, be a functioning country? Because splitting, like, let's talk about the most recent country to have formed, South Sudan. Now, obviously, Sudan was not a economically well-off country. South Africa's way more well-off than Sudan or South Sudan, way more off. But the thing is, South Sudan splitting from Sudan didn't really make them better economically or socially. It just made them worse, right? And obviously there was a lot more differences in South Sudan, with a lot more ethnic violence and whatnot. But again, that's the question. Will South Africa survive? Not South Africa, the Cape, West Cape, survive if they split from South Africa? Will they actually economically thrive? That's the question I really want answered.
The bill will past Parliament. Clearly, the right to hold the referendum is already included in both the National and the Western Cape Constitution, and therefore Parliament will have to sort of go against the South African Constitution, which would then force a motion to the Constitutional Court, and it may delay the inevitable. So I think probably my expectation is that the ANC will choose not to fight that battle, because I'm not sure it will be a battle that would be very beneficial to them. So I think that this legislation is going to be passed fairly quickly, and I think that's also the DA's expectation. And I think once it's been passed, the DA absolutely intends to call referendums in the Western Cape. I think what's on the question paper is up for debate, but the Referendums Act, or the Referendums Act as was, that the DA's private members bill actually seeks to repeal the Referendums Act and is amalgamating the Electoral Commissions Act. But what that allows for is multiple questions.
Which again, like the title of the video is Cape Independence realistic, right? For me, it being realistic means that it will survive economically, right? Like, will it? Will it not? We know that people want it. We can accept that the polling is done well, that it's been fact checked to oblivion, and that everyone accepts that it is, a well done polling, right? We can accept that. Will the Cape survive economically, socially, and politically if it splits from South Africa? Will that be true?
Referendums, and that's what I'm expecting to see, a consultation referendum, probably, let's call it that, between the people of the Western Cape and the Western Cape government, and I think that's going to include questions on a number of things, and I think Cape independence inevitably is going to be one of those. I think it would be almost impossible for the DA not to include the Cape independence question. 65% of their own voters want a referendum on Cape independence, 58% of all voters in the province want. So if you are the elected government, your name is the Democratic Alliance, and everybody wants a referendum on Cape independence, you're going to have to make a very strong argument to say, well, hang on a second,
again, like we're nearly done with the video, but like they haven't answered the question, which I think is a lot more prescient, which is it actually a good idea?
No,
like, yeah, sure, right? Like the ANC may not really be a good political party, and representing what people want, and actually be corrupted, and all these terrible things. But like, is the Cape actually going to survive if it goes independent? Is that a good idea? Which is prescient, right? Like, yeah, people want to feel in charge, and their vote means something, right? But that doesn't really mean anything if your country, your newly formed country, like the Cape of Good Hope or whatever it's going to be called, is going to go down the drain. Like, doesn't really mean much, Like,
we're going to go our own way and ignore the democratic will of just about everybody. So I expect us to see a referendum on Cape independence, yes, but probably not just on Cape independence.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this
okay, like, I didn't really answer the question, which is, again, yeah, people want Cape independence. Sure, people want to vote on Cape independence, right? But like, is it a good idea? Will it actually mean anything, right? Like, that's the point, And let me check the comment section, because I want to see what people generally feel about this. Save the Cape and save South Africa. Cape independence first is the only way to change the current political impasse. Not true. It has been done by many other little nations who were not facing China. You know what happened to a lot of those nations that went independent, right? They kind of became irrelevant and became subservient to their larger cousins. The only country is like Israel, right? Like, that's the only country in existence that really survived, but that's because they had the backing of the United States of America. I don't think the Cape is gonna have that. I don't think that's gonna have that at all. So again, and also with the first part, which is current political impasse, which is, again, like, the only way forward to make sure that South Africa moves past like the ANC and all these issues is you have to literally be on the ground making sure that people vote for a better political party. That's literally it. There's no other way around it but just doing that. It sucks. It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of push that you have to. It's a lot of yourself that you have to give. But that's the only way for it to, actually change. Because what's going to end up happening is, what if the Cape has other issues inside it, like all countries, and eventually those issues get so substantial, similar to the ANC, then what's the solution then? Another independent group from the Cape just becoming another independent group? It's like, that's not a viable solution, right? I support the idea in theory, but the larger issue at hand, of course, how the newly independent, and this is very true, like how will the Western Cape will handle economic sanctions in the event that African nations, like, okay, So obviously my issue wasn't really economic sanctions or anything like that. I obviously was more talking about how will it survive like economically with forming new trade relations and how will it do well economically, because a lot of South Africa's economic a lot of the things that make South Africa very economically well off is its resources. What will the Cape do without those accesses to this large amount of resources? Yeah, sure. The Cape does have a lot of good, natural resources to itself as well, but as South Africa as a whole has more than just that one specific part of West Cape. But this is also very important as well, like economic sanctions. In the event African nations like Lesotho doesn't recognize it as they are South Africa's water source, I think independence can be achieved with a referendum, but ensuring sustainability is the bigger question, and also how can a similar civil war situation like that happened at South Sudan be avoided. We all know the ANC and EFF view on any form of secession as a threat to their pan-Africanist ideals that built on open borders. So let's see what the response is. As far as I'm aware, water from the Lesotho is routed from the Vaal Dam. Water from the Orange River doesn't support the West Cape. Okay, let them dream. They must leave our country if they want independence. Okay. Even if there's no... So this doesn't really answer the question. Like, this one somewhat answers the question, but not really what I think is the more pressing one, which is how will Western Cape survive economically? By, again, they have to form new trade relations in a much weaker position than what they were beforehand. Some big questions regarding the practicality of this. Presumably, any move to leave South Africa would take some time. It won't be easy to pull off. But I'm also wondering, given the Brexit experience, if the general population would be able to make a wise decision. Okay, that's pretty good. How did the people reply? I think by the time they got enough support and went through the legal process, the ANC will have lost power and the reason for secession will have faded anyway. Okay, doesn't really talk about it. Like, yeah. Wait. Why is the spokesperson for the Cape Independence a Brit and their logo looks like the Union Jack flag? I mean, not untrue. But, like, again, like, I don't really think that's an issue. At all. With the crossing colors, remember the one thing true South Africans will be in charge of such an independence. It won't be a foothold for other countries to establish another rich colony in Africa again. Otherwise, I'm all out of ideas. Now, that's not necessarily, I guess, invalid to think. It is okay to be concerned that, hey, maybe some people will be interested in a Cape, an independent Cape, because they want, a part of Africa to control, especially one with, obviously the Cape having very good ports and harbors and being a very trade-oriented, part of South Africa, and tourist part of South Africa, a part of Africa. That's very valid to be conservative, but I don't really think it's that much of an issue. But yeah, again, this video doesn't really talk about, again, the issue of Cape independence, which is how will it survive economically, socially, and politically, because obviously South Africa is taken advantage of a lot of the times because it is a very weak country. But it'll be a weaker country, and the Western Cape independence, if it does form a country, will be even weaker, than what it was before. But yeah. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this.